mass immigration and illegal immigration is turning Britain into a powder keg.
Over 287 injured in hours. 62 streets are under red alert. And over 100,000 citizens across Britain demanding the immediate resignation of Keir Starmer. At 5:20 p.m, separate districts of Belfast began to crack under the weight of historic anti-immigrant riots, and in 8 sectors at once, Stop the Boat protesters practically declared war on the UK government. An immediate reaction followed. Far-right thugs face up to 8 years in prison. Dozens of armoured vans loomed on the streets of Northern Ireland. But at 5:50, the chaos was already unstoppable. For the first time in 8 months, police used water cannons on a crowd of hundreds of locals. Immediately, local media sent helicopters into the air. 10 miles away, protesters gave a harsh pushback against the line of officers. On the ground, about 82 arrests were made in a matter of hours. But then the worst happened. Anonymous recorded a Twitter message. "These are our streets. Illegals' objects are now under risk." And already at 6:43 p.m, the first fires broke out. Dozens of areas with residing migrants registered attacks. Right there, about 120 firefighters were deployed at full capacity. Suddenly, opposition figure Nigel Farage joined in. UK citizens have reached a breaking point due to the import of tens of thousands of illegals. Almost instantly, 91 new facilities were burned down. 7:30 p.m. sharp, reinforcements from other regions arrived at the battlefields. There were reports of over 220 officers distributed across the districts. 3 sectors at once were cordoned off by local police. But in just 48 seconds, mass groups began firing at police units. Hundreds of people began evacuating from 2 streets at once. Right then, the government released footage of the fires. Starmer stated, "We condemn the violence and call on the far right to lay down their weapons." But this had the absolutely opposite effect. 8:02 p.m. Locals began an attack with bottles and glass against the officers. 2 miles away, vans were furiously burned. Right then, TikTok footage surfaced, gaining 13.8 million views in a day. More and more new units kept arriving on 6 streets above. On 2 streets, officers began a counter-offensive. But at 8:23 p.m, they were subjected to a massive bombardment with stones. And this was all just the beginning. At 8:50 p.m, fireworks entered the scene. Groups in balaclavas started total chaos. On over 20 streets, houses with migrants were already catching fire. On the ground, armed squads blocked the roads, but in 4 minutes, locals started to disperse the officers. No one knew anymore how many arrests and injured there were, but the riots continued with triple force. Over the radio, it could be heard. The locals want to get rid of all the migrants here. And suddenly, an address by Keir Starmer was promised, but the riots did not end. The violent eruption we witnessed did not emerge from a vacuum. Westminster possessed at least 5 distinct internal reports highlighting massive working class resentment, severe strains on regional infrastructure linked to record high migration, surging fury over unvetted border crossings, warnings of inevitable cultural clashes, and clear indicators that citizens were reaching a dangerous breaking point. According to Nigel Farage, all of those warnings carried urgent tags demanding swift parliamentary intervention. Instead, Downing Street factually ignored the underlying crisis. Insiders suggest that Starmer actively avoided addressing root causes because acknowledging border failures contradicted his progressive platform. Complete denial. Simultaneously, ordinary locals watch their towns burn, frontline constables suffer severe injuries, and families are instructed to lock their doors. Any leadership that criminalizes frustrated citizens and label them as far right, rather than solving structural decay, inevitably breeds further radicalization. Throughout this administration's tenure, uncontrolled arrivals skyrocketed up to 1,000 small boat migrants daily. Social cohesion eroded, law enforcement resources dried up, and Downing Street became fixated on treating symptoms rather than the actual disease. Right now, as northern cities sink into turmoil, senior bureaucrats seem far more focused on monitoring social media posts for offensive language than deploying rapid riot control. On the dozens of streets, social anxiety rised up 510%. Such profound mismanagement illustrates exactly how an establishment surrenders public trust. Slowly, through countless acts of hypocrisy, the social contract disintegrates. Politicians will vehemently reject this reality. Spin doctors might try changing the narrative. Yet millions of working voters clearly saw the authoritarian double standards, and polls are not lying. Nearly 75% of Britons now are against Keir Starmer. The nation is currently managed by individuals who are eager to heavily sentence people for online comments while hesitating to convene emergency Cobra meetings when actual streets burn. Had these disruptions been orchestrated by left-wing climate activists or other so-called tolerant marchers, police forces would have likely been instructed to step back and facilitate the demonstrations peacefully. Because the outrage originated from the native working class, the immediate governmental reflex was not to heal a divided country, but to crush dissent and establish a two-tier justice system. According to Nigel Farage, these burning facilities were entirely preventable. For over 18 months, desperate citizens bombarded local councils with urgent appeals. Hundreds of petitions landed directly on parliamentary desks with a singular message. Stop the small boats immediately, taxpayers demanded across the nation. Working class families practically begged officials to halt the staggering expenditure of up to £8 million daily on welfare benefits. Public money was being visibly drained to sponsor three-star hotel accommodations for unvetted arrivals. Reportedly, these formal requests reached every relevant local representative without a single actionable response. Eventually, the absolute breaking point for ordinary Britons arrived via their smartphone screens. Daily viral videos began circulating, showing completely unfamiliar faces roaming residential neighborhoods. Shocking footage captured daylight robberies and brutal street clashes involving machetes and zombie knives. Such terrifying clips now routinely amass upwards of 20 million views within 24 hours. Consequently, foreign governments are openly questioning what exactly has happened to the fabric of Great Britain. One particularly frustrated diplomat from Donald Trump's inner circle publicly voiced the global confusion. Why is Britain actively destroying itself? The American official asked bluntly. Furthermore, international observers cannot comprehend why a population of 1.2 million undocumented individuals isn't facing continuous mass deportations. Replying to this mounting domestic and external pressure, Keir Starmer continues to issue repetitive, dismissive statements. Britain's Prime Minister insists that these so-called far-right groups represent merely a microscopic fraction of society. Downing Street desperately attempts to frame the opposition as having zero genuine public support. Currently, the ruling leader vastly prefers to deflect responsibility by claiming this migrant crisis is entirely an inherited problem. Blaming the previous Conservative government has become Whitehall's default defence mechanism. However, Farage aggressively counters this narrative by pointing to undeniable municipal data, highlighting a staggering 330% surge in localised crime. The opposition leader demands immediate accountability. He publicly questions why dinghies are still successfully crossing the channel every single morning. Infuriated voters echo his sentiments, wondering why they must fund luxury lodging for illegal crossers while their own infrastructure crumbles. Nobody inside Westminster seems willing to provide a straight answer to these basic financial questions. Instead of addressing the weaponized epidemics on the streets, parliamentarians debate online hate speech laws. Police chiefs are seemingly ordered to prioritize community relations over arresting armed thugs. Meanwhile, the sheer volume of undocumented males filling rural towns is fundamentally altering the demographic reality. Citizens who point out this obvious visual shift are immediately categorized as racists by state media. Unsurprisingly, the gaslighting only accelerates the underlying public rage. When a society is told its own eyes are lying, trust in institutions evaporates overnight. Exactly this kind of political arrogance paved the way for the recent explosive weekends. People simply grew exhausted of watching their taxes subsidize the erosion of their own safety. Every single pound spent on a migrant hotel is viewed as a pound stolen from failing public services. Hospitals face critical shortages, while newly arrived groups receive immediate housing and medical care. schools in low-income districts are overwhelmed by the sudden influx of non-English speaking dependents. Local mayors quietly admit they lack the resources to handle the integration, yet publicly toe the party line. Behind closed doors, even Labour MPs are expressing deep anxiety about the escalating street violence. Yet, at the official dispatch box, the narrative remains rigidly controlled and aggressively progressive. Anyone deviating from the approved script about diversity faces immediate condemnation. Therefore, the genuine fears of the working class are entirely outsourced to alternative social networks. Twitter groups and Facebook feeds have replaced traditional broadcasting as the primary source of raw street reality. Algorithms amplify the chaos, but they do not invent the zombie knives caught on local CCTV. Denying the existence of these weaponized gangs only emboldens them to operate with greater impunity. Across the Atlantic, American conservatives use London as a cautionary tale of unchecked progressive immigration policies. European allies watch in absolute disbelief as a former empire struggles to police its own shopping districts. Starmer's administration appears paralysed, caught between two liberal activist bases and the undeniable reality of urban decay. Decisive action requires acknowledging the failure of the border model, a step the current leadership refuses to take. So smuggling cartels openly mock the British border force on TikTok, advertising guaranteed entry. Lucrative criminal networks thrive precisely because they know the UK legal system is paralysed by human rights bureaucracy. Deportation flights are consistently grounded by last-minute appeals from taxpayer-funded activist lawyers. Entirely, the asylum apparatus functions less like a border defence and more like an automated processing facility for illegal entry. Ordinary taxpayers are trapped, funding a machine that actively dismantles their own community standards. Behind closed doors, ministers are reportedly panicking as public confidence evaporates entirely. Financial analysts estimate that the continuous unrest has already cost the British economy hundreds of millions in lost retail revenue. Meanwhile, the Police Federation has officially warned that their officers are physically exhausted and nearing a total operational breaking point. Dozens of experienced constables have quietly handed in their resignations this week, citing a lack of political backing from Whitehall. Courts across the country are running emergency 24-hour sessions just to process the sheer volume of digital speech offences. Shockingly, whistleblowers from the Justice Department claim that offenders are being released early under the scheme SDS-40 simply to free up prison cells for internet commenters. Foreign investors are now publicly questioning the stability of the UK market, with some actively relocating their assets to safer jurisdictions. Working-class voters, who traditionally formed the backbone of the Labour Party, feel utterly abandoned by the current metropolitan leadership. Union leaders representing transport workers have threatened to halt bus and train services if their members cannot be guaranteed safe passage through urban centres. Technology executives are allegedly facing immense pressure from Downing Street to artificially suppress trending hashtags related to the demonstrations. Consequently, trust in mainstream domestic broadcasters has hit a historic low, pushing citizens toward decentralized platforms for unfiltered updates. Suburban neighborhoods that never previously experienced political violence are now establishing localized neighborhood watch patrols. Throughout the northern industrial towns, a profound sense of cultural alienation has permanently severed the relationship between the governed and the governing. Diplomats stationed in London have privately communicated their bewilderment to their home countries regarding the Prime Minister's passive strategy. Every new statement issued from Number 10 seems to further alienate the very communities demanding systemic border reforms. Historically, Great Britain projected an image of steadfast law and order, but that global reputation is rapidly disintegrating on live television. Opposition strategists are capitalizing on the crisis, pointing out that national security was supposed to be a fundamental cornerstone of this administration. Local mayors are completely paralyzed, caught between the anger of their constituents and the strict political correctness enforced by central party bosses. Perhaps the most alarming development is the absolute normalization of armored riot vehicles patrolling quiet provincial high streets. Insurance premiums for small businesses operating in targeted zones have skyrocketed, forcing many independent shops into immediate bankruptcy. Generations of social integration efforts appear to have collapsed entirely under the weight of unsustainable demographic engineering. Rather than addressing the real problems of the asylum processing system, authorities continue to frame the public reaction as an inexplicable mystery. Furthermore, intelligence leaks suggest that extreme radical factions are utilizing the chaos to recruit disenfranchised youths on both sides of the political spectrum.